Well, welcome guys, thanks for checking out this video. We're going to be looking into what maybe perhaps be the best console to actually mod yourself. Now in the past I have covered content on modding other consoles and I enjoyed that very much because it just brings them back to life and you can actually get more playability out of them and make them more relevant in today and set them up onto your HD TVs. So have a good look around to see if there's anything relevant to you, and by always just give me a comment on how your setups are yourself. Now in the generation of the PS3 and the Xbox 360, I haven't actually modded those two consoles as of yet because I am still a bit of a collector and the consoles I own today seem to run pretty fine. But one console that I've had trouble with quite constantly is the Wii U. Now I've actually bought about 3 of these consoles. The first 2, the disk drive just keeps fading on me, so I'll put a game in, it'll work fine, and then it'll just won't read it at all. And I was like, I laid off the Wii U. I've always had trouble with Nintendo consoles, the controllers, I've always had troubles, but and this one, I know there's a lot of games I wanted to play on this. I know the console actually flopped on initial launch, but the titles are there, so if you haven't managed to pick one up and you're gaming yourself, I do advise picking that up. But for me, I've had problems with them or seem to be actually crashing and not just reading the disc. So I thought, you know what, on this one, I am going to mod this myself and just try and get the games working on the hard drive, because then I haven't got that problem at all. But of course it has its problems, which I'll explain later on in the video. Now of course this is just my opinion, perhaps I'm just getting carried away with it because it's kind of a new toy that I've been getting into quite a lot, but I always love to hear from you guys on what is your preferred actual console to mod. But always personally, that's always going to be my favorite, just because of how the community is always put together and they gave it more features even over 20 years later. But let's break it down for you. For the first of all, I'm going to look into actual NDS emulation on the system. Now because the actual console has native emulation support on there, you won't have to install any emulators to run NDS games, and the games absolutely run pretty awesome. You don't have the full catalog, but you do have access to a lot of titles that were included in the original eShop. Now one big feature about using it on the Wii U itself, of course, is that controller. So you've got that touch screen actual controls as well, and you have that split screen which comes from the bottom screen on the actual handheld screen, and then you got the main screen at the top, and that's probably one of the best ways how to play that actual handheld but on an actual modded console. Of course you can get these Android TV boxes, which I've covered content on before, with the T95 and the X88 Pro, and there's a lot of these Android boxes and the emulation is pretty awesome on it, and they do actually clear up pretty nice. And then we do have these other handhelds that are coming out now, so the actual emulators for the NDS or even the 3DS, as we're going to be seeing later on in this year, the emulation is going to be pretty awesome. But with the actual modded Wii U, you're going to always get that actual touchscreen support and dual screen. The screen layouts, you can always change how you actually want the game to look at. You can have 2 screens on the actual main screen itself, or you can have it all on your actual handheld and on the screen. That's one way I like to prefer to play them. So that's one pretty awesome way to play your NDS games. Next one up guys is the N64 emulation, and this has been requested on a lot of devices, and I do actually understand it because the actual console itself doesn't really have the best video output. So when you actually get this hooked up to a HDMI screen natively from a console, the image is always quite blurry. The only way I've actually managed to get kind of a decent type of video output is having an RGB modded N64, which was a Japanese console, as the European one you cannot RGB mod. And then I actually plugged in the level high HDMI adapter, and then with that upscaled to 720p, I've got that into a splitter. So I got that set up then, and then the output I've got the M Classic, which then polishes it up to 1440p, and that does add some anti-aliasing. But the problem with that console is that it already implements anti-aliasing, so that's why it does kind of round it off and just really smudge the texture as well. And of course the actual storage compatibility on those cartridges, you can never have high textures, so the actual video quality out of that console has always been a problem. So emulation has always been a kind of a best way to actually play these games, and the Nintendo Wii U does offer great compatibility. Of course it has a native emulator, so you can actually download the actual ROMs from the eShop, and there's a lot to actually choose from. Of course, again, you don't have all the actual library, one ROM I can still get my hands on is GoldenEye, and that was probably, you know, the actual favorite game to play, and that with 4-player would be absolutely fun, really polished up on HD screen. But there are some awesome titles now I can actually finally play and look kind of half decent now for the first time using the Nintendo Wii U.
Hurry.
There isn't actually many features that you can do with the built-in emulator on the console itself, which kind of lets it down, but the games actually look and run pretty awesome. You of course can download an emulator to run N64 games. I did try that out quite recently, but I found the compatibility quite low. You may get a bit lucky, but there are a couple of people that has actually made ROMs to actually use the emulator built into the console. So the one I've actually managed to run is the Banjo-Kazooie, and that runs pretty awesome, but I'm still struggling to find any more ROMs that you can actually install onto the main dashboard. And as I am on about installing games on here, there are different methods to try and get these games running after you've actually modded the console itself. So there are ways to actually put the ROMs in and put the installer files onto the SD card. I won't go into too much details on how to do this, just to give you a basic understanding before jumping in, and if you need to do it yourself. So of course there are emulators to run N64 that you can install. Then you have the actual installer ROM files that you then have to use Homebrew channel. Then you just got, you get further. Here we go. And with those installer versions, they will then put them on the main dashboard instead of going through an app and then using those other emulators. So that's the way I like to prefer it, is just using those installer versions. But to try and find those ROMs and installation files is quite hard to come by. Another good thing about this emulator is that you can actually map the controls to where you want it. So I'm using the Pro controller, so it just kind of maps it out then, and then you can choose how to actually lay out the buttons yourself, which is pretty nice touch. Right, next one up would have to be probably my main best feature about this modded actual console itself. I know I had to change the angle then because it was just basically showing my chins, so I thought just to change it up a bit. But in this one, the actual Gamecube emulation is pretty awesome, and you're thinking, why didn't the actual Wii U already come with that included when you actually bought it? But basically it is basically a GameCube that has just been beefed up. If you think on how the actual GameCube was built, and then it went from the Wii itself, basically the Wii was just a bit more powerful GameCube, so that is why it can natively play GameCubes pretty fine. And then the Wii U version is just basically a Wii, but with a better processor, perhaps some other features that I haven't really looked into, but a lot of the hardware is a lot of the same of the Wii, but just beefed up, and that is why you can play Wii games. So the fact that it can play Wii games and has the same type of hardware that is beefed up, it would also play GameCube games, just like the Wii could. So the compatibility with the Wii U itself is pretty awesome. It'll play them just like it were on a original Wii console. And that kind of blew my mind. I know I'm a bit late to the party on that, so I thought this is one good reason why I really had to try and mod this out myself, because with that actual console you can actually get a HDMI output with your GameCube games, well, backups should I say, and that would upscale it to 720p. So there are a couple of ways to actually do this. Again, that is that installer way, where you can actually put the installer files then onto a SD card, install them onto the main actual home screen, but that can be a bit of a bother. But the way I've actually managed to do this a bit more conveniently is using the app Nintendo. Now you may remember that being on the original Wii itself, but now this is the Wii U version. So I just downloaded the actual application and installed that onto the home screen. Then when you boot up Nintendo, it just looks like the Wii version, so you can access games like that. And you can also do other features, and you can also use the actual Wii U Pro controller as a GameCube controller as well, so that's pretty fun. But the way I wanted to try and do it is use an actual GameCube controller to play my GameCube games. Pretty simple, right? And I thought, well, this could play them pretty fine, that'd be absolutely awesome. So do you remember those GameCube adapters that you could get for the Wii U originally, so that you could play your Smash Bros with the GameCube controller? I plugged one of them in. It wasn't the actual official one because they're really hard to get by and they're really expensive. So I actually purchased a third-party one. I plugged that into the back, but I plugged my GameCube controller and Nintendo wouldn't actually recognize that adapter. So I was like, what other way could you do that? So another feature, another method of way that I could actually do this was using this contraption. And one of these adapters would then convert the Wii remote into a controller, into a Gamecube controller. Now these adapter itself, they were quite expensive, they were pretty sparse to actually buy online. I looked on eBay and they were pretty pricey, or they were just only available in America. But this one is actually from Play Asia and the price was pretty decent. It took about 2 weeks to get to me, but finally now I could set that up. But of course there's always problems with Nintendo consoles with me. To actually set up controllers, there always just seems to be out of sync problems, or you have to reconnect issues. So the convenient factor of playing GameCube games on a modded Wii is pretty nice, but you always have those problems. For instance, then when I boot up a game, sometimes the actual mapping of the buttons would change, and then I would have to actually resync the controller again and reorder it like you would do on the main menu. But when you got things going, it is pretty awesome. Not much latency at all with using that controller. Now when it comes to the actual console running these games, they do look pretty awesome, but there's one big downfall. Because the games are actually upscaling to 720p or even 1080p depending on your system's settings, the scaler itself is pretty naff, so the games do look a bit out of blur even though they're pumping out a 1080p. A GameCube game on a GameCube console and then use one of those HDMI adapters, they actually do look better, because depending on the scaler that you use, the actual Wii U one is not that great at all. But you have features like widescreen settings, and you can also stretch the screen to the way you like it. But the way they actually emulate and play games natively with the emulators built in, and that goes through even the NES, SNES, N64, is they seem to crop the screen a bit, so you're not entirely filling the screen of all the game imagery. Now when it comes to original Wii games, I'm not going to go into great detail about this actual method because everyone could play Wii games anyway, but to actually install Wii games I found a bit difficult, as if you can get those installer files, you could then put them straight to the home screen. What's going on with my home screen? There we go, that's better. So with that way you can just access them straight away, but I haven't really found another way to actually get the other ISO files and use a different method to play them, because to get those installer versions of the actual disc images I found pretty sparse, and there's a few titles I would love to try and get my hands on, but I just can't get that actual downloadable version. Now there are other methods to try and actually run games on this by using other apps, and one of them for example is Loadline GX. Once you've opened that up, you then access games onto your SD card, but then you're restricted to putting your actual disc images, your ROMs and things like that only on your SD card. And they are pretty expensive at the time of this video, but if you've got like a 512 gigabyte actual SD card, then you can fit as much as Wii U games, Wii, so on and so forth. But the way I've got it now, I've just got a solid state hard drive. But of course I'd love to hear from you guys and how you actually managed to do this yourself. And then lastly, of course, it plays Wii U games. Now one thing I was quite surprised with actually modding this is that when you've actually installed it, you can actually install downloadable updates and the DLC as well. So for instance, I downloaded the Smash Bros and you can get all the characters. Pretty awesome. And the way I'm actually using this is using Wii U USB helper. You download that program and then you slot in your USB hard drive, and then you can actually download things and put them on your hard drive that way. Of course, after you have modded it. Now I know Nintendo are just a bit of a nightmare on YouTubers exploiting their actual consoles, but you must have to admit the Wii U did kind of flop, and now the Switch has taken off pretty nice. And the one thing I've actually come out of actually modding this is I kind of can't wait to now get an actual Nintendo Switch myself. Oh, and of course, when it comes to retro gaming, there are multiple ways to do this. You can actually install them, like I've mentioned before, the actual files that were available on the eShop. So there's NES games, there's SNES games, there's also TurboGrafx and Neo Geo. But you are limited to what was available on the eShop. But of course, there's RetroArch. Now you can actually install this and then you can have access to other consoles like Sega CD. When it comes to PlayStation 1 games, there is a bit of a compatibility issue with that, but I have heard people have overclocked the processor to actually run PlayStation 1 games. But for me that just is quite inconvenient, and you are putting more strain on that processor, and you have to do more methods before actually just opening the game. And I also have other ways to actually play PS1 games, so I'm completely happy without doing that. So with RetroArch and basically almost every Nintendo console being available to you with some great support and also some native actual emulation as well, it is pretty awesome. But then the downfall is how you actually have to go around actually modding it yourself as well is probably a little bit more difficult than you would mod other consoles, and the method around actually putting games onto a hard drive is a bit more difficult as well. And of course, you got the problems with the controllers. It might just be me, but I always have problems syncing up controllers. But when it just comes to Wii U games, use a Pro controller and there's no problems at all. Now I know there's a lot of people using PC emulations, and that's pretty awesome. But the fact that you're using an original Nintendo console, I think is pretty sweet. So let me know in the comments box below of what is your favourite console to mod. Again, I probably am just getting carried away that I've got a new toy now playing around using these actual games I have been looking forward to play for a long time. So as always, if you like this video, hit that button. If you want to support this channel, I know 97% of my audience who are watching are not subscribed, but if any of you viewers could subscribe, that'd be absolutely awesome. Leave your comments below and I'll catch you lot on the next video.